Patty, thank you very much for having me to the facility. This is amazing, and the tour has been amazing. And so you've also been very patient with me as we try to get this coordinated. So thank you for the invite. So I want to have you kind of go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience of, I have an audience of restorers, obviously, and some cleaners. So kind of introduce yourself to people who don't know who you are.
All right. Well, first of all, I am so excited to finally have met you in person.
Same.
I think we've been on Zoom calls together
Yes.
and other things throughout the pandemic.
Yes.
So this is actually a real pleasure for me.
Same.
So I was what people in this industry would probably remember me as is I was the executive director of GBAC, the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, which was and still is a division of ISSA.
Yep.
And so that was an exciting 4 or 5 years for me. We did to me, I'm very proud of what we put together with GBAC. I wrote the guidelines for GBAC facility accreditation. And we had an amazing team that helped organizations worldwide be able to stay open, keep open, and, be safe.
Yeah.
That being said, prior to that, I spent most of my career in safety environmental, and I was a AVP at Emory University for both the university and healthcare, providing environmental health and safety support. So I supported all of the, custodial services and also high containment laboratories. I was part of Team Ebola at Emory, where we had the 4 Ebola patients. Dealing with all of the issues associated with that. I also, before that, was in pharma. So clean rooms, animal containment, research. And I had the best of both worlds. I always say it like this, actually the 3 worlds. I had human health, I had animal health, and I even had plants. We owned Monsanto for a while. So I learned a little bit about that. Plant pathogen. I have been involved internationally with biorisk management and biosecurity as a convener for ISO for the development of international standards on biorisk management. Excited because we're about ready to publish the credentialing guidelines for biosafety or biorisk professionals. That's an exciting accomplishment, which has not been easy during the pandemic.
Yes.
To get this done.
Who would you classify? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Who would you classify as a biorisk professional?
According to those guidelines, those are like laboratory professionals.
Okay.
But, I'll take this back because one of my passions, as you know, has been, and I actually have given talks on this, that biosafety, that whole discipline of biosafety really goes beyond the lab.
Yeah.
And that for pandemic preparedness or preparedness against epidemics, even a flu outbreak, that we should be ready for a scalable response at the front level. And I don't think we've done a very good job of that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, okay. So talk about like biorisk management and what that means. I mean, you talked about the laboratory level for biorisk professionals, but what does biorisk management mean? We've been through Ebola and the pandemic that we just came, COVID.
We could go even further than that. We've had outbreaks around the world, Nipah virus in India, and we've had, the monkeypox.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. And we've had Zika, if you remember Zika,
I do.
Or swine flu. We have concerns about avian influenza in our poultry industry. So to me, frontline biorisk management is realizing not to be a germaphobe. I am not a germaphobe. I have a respect. It's sort of like if there's a snake out there, I have a respect for, a rattlesnake.
Yes.
But, understanding what infectious diseases are, understanding how different infectious diseases may infect me, and then how to break that chain of infection, and sanitation and cleaning and disinfection, mitigating those risks is really an important step there.
Yes. Okay. So talk about one of the things that you mentioned as we were touring the facility. So there's going to be pictures and stuff that you can look at. It is really incredible. But the difference between cleaning and disinfection and sterile, like there's a difference between each of those steps, right? So talk about the difference between each of those terms.
Okay. Well, I won't get real sciencey in it,
Okay.
but I'm going to just talk about that. I think that in general industry, people that we are providing services to, they have a false sense of if we disinfect, if we clean, that we've sterilized the facility. And that's not true. It's really when we're getting a surface ready for disinfection, we're removing, the gross contamination, the dirt, the dust. We're making it prepared for sanitization, disinfection. And when you go from sanitization to disinfection to sterile, you are validating and verifying that you have actually removed a specific amount of pathogen. And you can show, it's actually what we call a log reduction of those pathogens. And there's an art and a science to this, but removing those, and when we're looking at different technologies that are out there, that's important to know, and to know when you need to sanitize, when you need to disinfect, and when, if you're going into like sterile manufacturing, that's a huge issue to ensure that you have that sterilization step.
And how are you measuring for level of sanitization and the log number that you just discussed you're talking to a store, so I got to ask these questions.
So there's a new guideline that's out there. When I was at GBAC, we, Hannah, one of the individuals that had worked for me, we prepared a document called a validation verification. I actually worked with a lot of our vendors. And we prepared the first draft, and it was really looking at, because we would get questions all the time. I have this ATP meter, what do I do with it?
Yes.
And I have this ATP meter and I got it down to 0. So therefore I don't have any pathogens, right? And it's like, no. Or I have this ATP meter and I just use my disinfectant. And before I use the disinfectant, I had basically low numbers. Now I have high numbers. Why? And so understanding how to use them, and then realizing that there's ways and there's different technologies that are out there, that you can utilize. QPCR, man, we never even knew what QPCR was until after the pandemic, right?
Yes.
Swab testing, air monitoring, all these different ways to be able to verify and validate that your space is clean and clear. So there was the first version. They just came out with the second version. And realistically, over the last couple months, I've even identified some other things. And there are some things that are going to come out on the market that are going to help us. So,
sorry if you can hear that through my microphone.
She's hungry. But I think that's where the science comes into it. And, even ATP meters, if you look at a Hygiena versus a Kikkoman, they measure different types of things.
Okay.
And so understanding what your validation method is, how it works, so that you can show that what you're doing is effective.
Yep.
If you measure it, you can manage it, and then you can defend it too. I've seen folks in the restoration industry who, utilize, let's say, an ATP meter where they are showing on their even documentation that they provide to their clients, where this is what the numbers were before I did anything. Here's my numbers afterwards. So you have a trail, and that's important. In laboratories, I think we have a way to, what they do is they put a spore strip on the wall, and it's a containment lab. So they seal the room up. This is a very typical way that they would sanitize or disinfect and sterilize. And then they would use a hydrogen peroxide to mist or fog the room, basically. And then they would take that spore strip and they would incubate it to see if they have any colony forming units. Because it was the Bacillus thermophilus, I can never say that right, spore strip. And if they got a 6-log kill, then they were good to go. If they didn't, they had to do it again. And so that's how we did the Ebola rooms. At the end, we used hydrogen peroxide to, basically fog the rooms after the Ebola persons left, and we had cleaned it to the point where we could fog it. And then we would verify that we had at least a 6 log or more kill.
Okay, so talk a little bit about what it was like being involved in Ebola. I think compared to, and I'm sure that there are things that you can't talk about, which is fine, but I think compared to anything else that the US has seen, the amount of fear that surrounded Ebola was at a different level, even than COVID. I think it just was different. We didn't understand it, didn't know what it was, knew that, anyway. So talk a little bit about what that was like, and were our fears reasonable? What should the US be doing maybe differently to prepare? That's a big question. But to prepare for something like that in the future, because it's going to happen again.
I think when we look at pandemics, it's not if, but when.
Yeah.
And it could be tomorrow and it could be 50 years from now. We just don't know.
Yeah.
First of all, I would say that I have a huge respect for the doctors and nurses that provided that care and putting their lives at risk, not knowing what they were stepping into.
Yeah.
And even today, there's a group called NETEC. It was put together initially, it was the National Ebola Training Program, and it was the hospitals that are highly involved in the network that if we had something like that, it's now the Emerging Infectious Disease Network, basically.
Okay.
And they look at that training for staff. I remember I actually stayed on campus during the first, throughout that 4 or 5 months that we had those 4 patients on campus, sometimes at night. And I remember calling home one night, and that was the only time I could vent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, because you just didn't know.
Yeah.
My husband, my son, my oldest son, both my sons are surgeons, and my oldest son was in medical school at the time. And my husband said to me, he goes, Patty, he goes, I want you to stop for just a minute. He goes, I want you to hear what Tom had to say, and Sean. And I said, okay. They wanted to know if you understood how cool this was. And I was like, what? And they said, do you realize your role in helping people stay safe? And how cool it is that you get to be part of this. And these are kids that are going to be doctors.
Yes. Yes.
And he goes, so in other words, put your big girl pants on and go to work.
Okay.
And I was like, okay. And to have been part of that team, to be, I'm breaking up a little bit here. To be part of that team. Yeah, that was one of the things that was really near and dear to my heart.
I bet. I can't. Thank you for doing that, because I remember watching on the news, and kind of you're watching the updates every day and seeing what's going on, and then it's like, oh my gosh, a nurse maybe has it now, and whatever, and that was hard to watch. And then you didn't know, people that were getting isolated in their homes because they just returned, and it's like, do they have it? And there were so many unknowns. So
there was a lot of unknowns, and then there was a lot of looking back on some of the situations. There was some kind of, you can laugh at it now, but having over 100 news agencies on your campus, and having to walk through those news agencies to get to the unit, you didn't want to be identified as somebody on the team, as well as, getting letters. We had available to us security if we ever felt threatened. The hospital was amazing, just an amazing support system.
That's good.
And I would say both, all the key hospitals, Nebraska, Emory, Bellevue, they were just amazing.
What is a key takeaway that you had, either from that or maybe from COVID? Those are probably the 2 big ones that people can think of. What are some of your biggest takeaway from those?
In retrospect, again, I would say I was hoping that we would have a better sense of preparedness. I don't think we're there yet. And I say that because, with Ebola, we knew we weren't prepared at the front line. And what I try and explain to people is, and rightfully so, we spend a tremendous amount of time, what I would call hospital preparedness and preparing our healthcare system, which is extremely important, and we cannot not do that.
Yep.
What we don't do is, to me, the front line.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, and what I have talked to people about is, by the time somebody gets to an emergency room, it's too late.
Yeah.
That means that they have probably exposed other people to whatever they may have.
Yep.
And so our detection systems need to be better. They need to be quicker, faster, better. And as you know, I'm on one advisory board of a technology that's been published recently that hopefully we'll see in the market in the next year. There is, so that detection ability has to be better, so that we as medical professionals can also treat quicker.
Yeah.
Or that we can identify that we have a problem coming into the United States in our airports. The other thing is that, I really, the sanitization, cleaning, disinfection industry has such an important role. I have always felt that what I call a scalable response.
Yep.
That we have day-to-day routine cleaning and sanitization. And that, and I always give like flu as an example, because that's something that people will talk about.
Yes.
So, okay, you have your normal day-to-day stuff. I could go into the whole rant about we don't value those people enough, and that we don't train and we don't understand the technology that we're using enough. That being said, okay, we're heading into flu season. Should we change something? Yeah, I would say, you should, if you're in a school system, add into a sanitization or disinfection step.
Yeah.
Okay, then you realize that there's the flu numbers, let's say, are going up in your area. Okay, maybe you need to do it a little more often. Maybe you need to either clean or sanitize or disinfect a little more often.
Yeah.
And then you have numbers going up in your facility. Or you have to, like the schools shut down. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so have a plan in place and teach people those things that they can do to protect themselves. Again, that whole education, breaking the chain of infection, understanding how you might become infected, and that different pathogens are different. A bacteria is different than a virus, and people are afraid of the science part of it. It doesn't have to be that scary and that hard.
Yes. Talk a little bit about how contractors should be kind of vetting the tools that they're using, whether it is the disinfectants that they choose, or we were talking about microfiber cloths and how to care for those. So that would probably be a good thing to talk about right now. But, and this can kind of lead into, so, you and I kind of met through SteraMist, although we've had many cross friends in the industry for a long time. But, there are a lot of different options out there and a lot of different tools and a lot of different ways to apply. And there's just a lot out there. And I think sometimes contractors get bogged down by the number of choices and how to make those choices and know that they're choosing the right thing for whatever they're working on. Yes.
I mean, it really is hard for, for a lot of contractors. They don't have the time.
Yeah.
They may not have the scientific background, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, there
are people like you with the scientific background for a reason.
Well, it was the other day. It's like if I ask my one son about, my one son's a plastic surgeon, one's a general surgeon.
Okay.
And if I ask like my one son a question, I'll get the mom. I'm not an internist or something like that. And it's like, no, you're right. You may have a better understanding about something, but it is what it is. So, when we're looking at different technologies, and for those contractors, it is a very challenging, how do I choose? Because you have cost, you have effectiveness, and efficiency.
Yeah.
And, how you then apply, all comes into play. And so, knowing your situation, if you are a residential cleaner, it is different than if you are, let's say, deconning a BSL-3, a biosafety level 3 facility. If you are servicing a manufacturing line in a plant, okay, that's a bad, Okay, food safety.
Yep.
Food safety is going to be different than, a hotel room.
Hmm.
And so understanding your situation, what do you need to do? What makes sense? How are you verifying and
Yep.
validating? I'm a real supporter of audit programs. I say that tongue in cheek a little bit because I've been on, the side of, oh God, the auditors are here and,
Yeah.
like that. But when I say internal auditing programs, I believe in what we call an integrated auditing program. And what that is that you have a system in place that you're verifying that what you're doing is effective.
Okay.
And that you utilize it in such a way that it's also a training tool for you
Mhm.
and your teams. Because we don't think about it. Everybody thinks about it as, oh my goodness, I'm going to get audited and I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And you don't want that.
Hmm.
You want people to bring issues to you. So understanding if you mentioned microfiber or, these new fibers that are out there. First of all, I joke around about myself a little bit because it's like the first time it's like, okay, so it's a fiber cloth, why is it special? And the joke was, it's like, okay, they're made out of what? They're not cotton? Okay. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's great. I'm not supposed to wash them with my general cotton cloth.
Me, I guess.
Or throw them in the dryer at a high temp, I mean,
No fabric
no
softener.
fabric softener, it's like there's little things like that
Yeah.
that make a difference.
Yeah.
I was in a very high-end hotel one time and the housekeeping staff left microfiber in the sink. And I can guarantee you that piece of microfiber, and this was a 5-star hotel, that piece of microfiber was doing nothing. They didn't maintain their microfiber very well.
Yeah. Just moving.
And
things.
so, yeah. And then when we get into some of the tools, it's really technique, it's training technique and tools.
Mhm.
And when we look at those tools that we're providing our staff, do we train them on it? Do we show them how to use it? You would hate to have a surgeon utilize, an x-ray, even in something like that,
Yeah.
or, a special scalpel, or a laser, some of the new laser surgeries and stuff without having been trained on it.
Yeah.
And yet we're providing some folks with sometimes very expensive equipment and not training them on the tools. And so if we don't do that, how can you expect them to efficiently and effectively use them?
So where should the industry be turning for training? What are some good opportunities to train? I mean, our industry does focus a lot on getting your water restoration technician certification or your structural drying or odor removal, those kind of certifications that we have on the restorer side. But what about the cleaning side?
Wow, you really have opened up that one.
I know.
So I think that there right now it's fractured, I will
Yeah.
say. You have ISSA training, you have IICRC training, you have some training that's coming out of Canada that I've seen that is going to be phenomenal. You have I would say companies, like SteraMist or iTeam or, that are developing their own internal training programs for their equipment and tools.
Yep.
And I think that what we're going to see here, I'm hoping, that some of the stuff I'm working on, that we're going to start pulling some of these things together to be able to say, okay, here is a program that will help you get your team to where it will be.
Yeah.
And that recognition that if you're using a SteraMist, are you something that I'm going to go ahead and spill the beans, a certified SteraMist Pro, meaning that you can tell your clients, this has been serviced by somebody who's actually been trained in our technology.
Yeah.
Or if it is, there's some other groups that are out there that are doing the same thing. And I think it's important that not only for your ability to tell your clients and to be able to shout it that, Ecolab Science Certified is one that we see.
Yeah.
But to be able to also, it's important to the individuals who are doing this, that you care about how they are doing it and you care about developing them. I'm really an advocate of developing your people. And I don't think that industries, I don't care what it is, whether
Yeah.
it's high containment laboratories, where it's science, where it's even professionals, you know, in whatever, that we give them the tools and techniques enough.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Anything else that we should talk about before we wrap it up? I appreciate you inviting me out here and sharing your expertise and all of
Well,
that.
first of all, again, it was a real pleasure to meet you. This is a passion area to me. I will honestly say, when I first gave a keynote it was an actually IICRC meeting, and that's when I met John Barrett. I think I stood up, but I think the first thing out of my mouth was, I didn't know you guys existed. And what I am finding is that there's an association for just about anything.
There is, yes.
And that there are some things that we're going to see more and more of. I'm working with a group. There was one association that wasn't existing, and that is Legionella here in the United States. And there's an organization that will be announced here soon, the International Legionella Control Association. And in fact, we're going to have our first symposium here, a small regional one this summer. There are a lot of things that are out there that we need to keep, on top of. And I think, CNR magazine is amazing to be able to keep,
Thank you.
us in touch with those things.
I appreciate that. So if restorers are taking one thing away from this, looking maybe at the next pandemic, our industry shifted pretty greatly toward cleaning when it first started and got lots of cleaning contracts. And so what's one thing that restorers should do to be prepared for the next time something like that happens?
Don't forget about the cleaning. Make sure that your staff is trained really for, training, technique, and tools. Just because you train them once, people forget.
Yes.
And it is something that we can't shy away from.
Yeah. Agreed. Patty, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.